So our next session is William J. Kellin session, and for that I would like to invite the moderator, Dr. Navneet Shah sir from Ahmedabad. William J. Kellin session. William J. Kellin won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine 2019 for the discovery of how cells sense and adapt to oxygen availability. So for this session, we have the moderator with us, Dr. Navneet Shah sir from Ahmedabad. He is the director and Department of Diabetes and Endocrinology at Sterling Hospital, Ahmedabad. He is Honorable President at Association of Physicians of Ahmedabad. He is Honorable Joint Secretary of Endocrine Society of West Zone and Secretary of Gujarat Diabetes Association. We welcome you, sir, and request you to introduce our panelists. We have we have the panelist with us, Dr. V. Mohan, who is the chairman at Dr. Mohan's Diabetes Specialty Center and president of the Madras Diabetes Research Foundation, Chennai. He is the recipient of more than 180 awards, including the Dr. B.C. Roy National Award by the Medical Council of India and the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Centenary Award for Excellence in Research for ICMR project. So we welcome you, sir, and over to you, sir.
So, sorry for the trouble and sorry for being late in this symposium. At the outset, let me thank Dr. Mayur Patel, Yash Patel, and Dr. Mona Shah for giving me this opportunity to have a discussion with two stalwarts of diabetes in the field of diabetes and endocrine from India. They are the international speakers. And today's symposium is about insulin and diabetics, a lifelong commitment, which is going to be of 30 minutes. And I have two speakers. One is Dr. Mohan, V. Mohan, whose name is familiar to each and everyone in India. And he is, I would say that, a great trendsetter in the field of diabetes and research. And he is with us. He is Padma Shri. Dr. Mohan has been confirmed fellowships from all four Royal Colleges of Physicians, London, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Ireland, and all three science academies of India, including fellowship from the National Science of Academy. He has been the recipient of over 180 awards, including the B.C. Roy National Award by the Medical Council of India, B.R. Ambedkar Centenary Award for Excellence in Biomedical Research from ICMR, and the highest award for biomedical research in India. In 2018, he received Dr. Harold Rifkin Award from the American Diabetes Association and is the first Indian to receive this award. Recently, he was conferred the fellowships of Royal Society of Edinburgh, FRSE, from the Royal Society of Edinburgh. He published more than 1,000, to be precise, 1,320 papers in peer-reviewed journals, including 860 original articles, 300 review articles, and he is invited by many editorials, and 160 chapters to the textbook of diabetes, and also his work has received over 131,000 citations and has an index of 132. In 2012, Dr. Mohan was awarded the Padma Shri Award from the Government of India. So we have Dr. Mohan, and the another great person in the field of diabetes endocrine is Dr. Anil Bansali, who is the senior endocrinologist and ex-professor and head of the endocrinology postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research from Chandigarh. He is MBBS, MD Medicine, DM Endocrine from PGI Chandigarh and FRCP from Glasgow. Part of many innovative research findings reported for the first time by him. He has more than 400 publications in national and international peer-reviewed journals. He authored the book of Clinical Rounds in Endocrinology, Volume 1 and 2, which was published by Springer. He delivered more than 350 lectures nationally and internationally. He established for the first time in India the genetic analysis facilities for metabolic bone disease, facilities for insulin clamp studies, indigenous offloading system, and revascularization procedure for diabetic foot, and national registry for primary hyperparathyroidism. He is an international award with WIDF Outstanding Investigator Award in 2019. He has a visiting professorship award at Henry Ford Institute in Detroit, USA. In 2018, he also received the visiting professorship award at Temple University, Philadelphia, USA. And again in 2018, visiting professorship award at University Albany, USA. And he has many national awards like Professor B.S. Raheja Memorial Oration, BC Roy Award edition, Novo Nordisk Lectureship Award, and so forth and so on. He was the president of Endocrine Society of India in 2011 and 2012. So let me start with the questions, and I welcome both the honorable dignitaries in the session, and welcome Dr. Mohan and welcome Dr. Bansali. So I'm going to start with the first question, that should a clinician focus on postprandial spike and absolute PPG number or both, and how one can control his postprandial spike after the major meal? Dr. Bansali, please. This question is addressed to Dr. Bansali. We would not have any slide presentation, but both the speakers are going to give their views on the microphone. Please, Dr. Bansali.
Dr. Navneet, I'm not sure if Dr. Bansali is there. I don't see his.
Sir, actually, Dr. Bansali has some internet connectivity issue, so he is trying to join through his mobile, sir.
Okay.
So I think, so I'm sorry, Dr. Mohan, but can you take up this question?
Yeah, I can do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please. Okay.
So I think the question is about the postprandial spike, absolute postprandial number, and both. See, today with the advent of continuous glucose monitoring, unlike earlier where we had only an SMPG at a particular time when you test, you know whether the sugar is high or not. Today, with the advent of continuous glucose monitoring, flash glucose monitoring, ambulatory glucose profile monitoring, we get the complete profile of the blood sugar swings, the amount of time it is raised, the time in range, everything is possible to assess today. So I think all of them are important, not just the spike alone, but how much of time is in the range, how much of time is above range, and so on. I think in relation to insulin, the question I would twist it around a little bit and say that if you control the fasting, where the first part of it talks about HbA1c fasting and postprandial. So I think the question often asked is the fasting is controlled and A1C you look at, is it sufficient or should you look at postprandial? I think postprandial is independent risk factor of heart disease, of atherosclerotic process, and of oxidant stress and so on. And therefore, that is where I think the role of premixed insulins and co-formulations comes in, because if you give only a basal insulin, especially in our Indian pattern where we have a high carbohydrate diet, the fasting sugar may come down. The basal insulin given at night will bring it down. The postprandial can still be very high. In the West, they say if you bring down the fasting, PP comes down. I don't agree. I think in India, even if the fasting comes down, PP can still remain high. And therefore, that is where I think the role of a postprandial agent, a prandial insulin, either you give the regular insulins given, or if you have a premixed insulin or a co-formulation, that will help to bring down the postprandial blood sugars. And I believe that the postprandial blood sugars are equally important. So today we have 4 parameters, not 3, not just fasting, PP, and HbA1c, but also time in range. So if the time in range is above 70%, closer to 100%, then I think all the 4 parameters we have looked at. That will be my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. I would further ask you one question in connection with this one. What is the difference between the glycemic variability and time in range?
So there are 2 different things. Time in range just tells you set a particular range. Suppose the lower limit is set at 70. That is what we typically set it at. Upper limit, depending on the type of patient, you can set it at 140 or at 180. For an older person, you can set it at 180. Pregnancy, you may even set it at 120. But you set an upper limit and a lower limit. Now, how much of the day is under that period is called time in range. Whereas glycemic variability just depends on how much variability is there from the lowest point, the nadir, to the peak, the highest point. So that variability is called GV or glycemic variability. It has nothing to do with time in range, it's just the variability. For example, if the variability is only 20 or 30 or 40, from say 70, it goes to 110, or from 120 it goes to 160, then the variability is very, very little. But suppose from 70 it goes to 350, then the variability is very, very high. So not only the time in range is not achieved, but what we call as a mean amplitude of glycemic excursion, or MAGE, is also very high. And the work of Monnier et al. And others has shown that that glycemic variability itself is enough to induce oxidant stress and to predispose you to heart disease and both micro and macrovascular complications. So the glycemic variability is also an important index. And we've learned more about this after the continuous glucose monitoring systems have come.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mohan. Now, the second question, which was originally your question, that in your opinion, when should we initiate the insulin? That is one. And how can we overcome the clinical inertia of timely insulin intervention? So, or initiation, whatever we call. So that is a very important part. And I think you would guide the audience regarding the initiation of insulin treatment in type 2 diabetes.
Absolutely. So I used to joke that, when all else fails, we have God and we have insulin. So that used to be the mantra that we follow. You try, now we've got 8 different types of tablets. So we'll try all the 8. And when that fails, and finally wisdom dawns that, oh, these are not working, that is a time when people consider insulin. I would submit that it's too late. And as you rightly said, that is what is called as clinical inertia. We know the A1C is 14. And then we add one more tablet and we are expecting from 14 it will come to 6.5. We know it will never happen, It may 14 to 13. And then, only 13. Then I'll add one more. Then it comes to 12.5. Then you add one more, it comes to 11.5. Then you add one more, it comes to... We are wasting time. Each time 6 months, 3 months goes. And by the time the seeds for the complications are already sown. And that is how people develop retinopathy, nephropathy, foot problems, heart problems, and so on. So when you know that more than 2 agents are already used and it's not going to respond, the A1C is far too high. If the A1C is say 7.2 or 7.3, yes, one more drug and I can make it. But the A1C is still 10 after giving 2 drugs. Where is it going to come down just by adding one magic third drug? It's not going to come down 10 to 6.5 is not going to come. No agent, no oral agent is that powerful, particularly when already used up 2. So those are one indication. But I go much further than that. I have been for many years now propagating that even at the time of diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, somebody presents to you with type 2 diabetes and his A1C is 12 or 13 or 14. Now just starting with one metformin, we'll try diet first, then we'll try exercise further, and then we'll try one metformin, then we'll try one thing. You'll be only trying all your life. It'll never going to get under control. And the best you may get is even 7. Whether you'll get it at all, you don't know. So I believe in giving at the time of diagnosis, if there is glucotoxicity and lipotoxicity, a short course of insulin given at that time, even once a day, even for 30 days is enough. And like magic, it responds. The glucotoxicity goes away, lipotoxicity goes away, beta cell function improves, the natural history of diabetes improves. And then you will find that after some time, not only after that 4 weeks, even insulin is not needed. Sometimes 2 or 3 of the tablets can also be stopped. And you'll be just left with metformin or sometimes even nothing. People go into remission of diabetes. So that is another indication that I would start insulin. Of course, apart from that, we have all the usual indications. Somebody has myocardial infarction or has some infections, foot infection, preoperative, all those kind of other things, emergencies, stress, COVID, all these things are other indications. I'm just talking about a routine type 2 diabetes. Of course, type 1 I'm not even discussing. Pregnancy I'm not even discussing. I'm just talking about type 2 diabetes. Don't wait till the very last. Think of insulin early because insulin, we just heard a symposium where Dr. Makkar spoke, where so many other advantages of insulin is there, which the tablets do not have. So never hesitate to use insulin. Now, clinical inertia, to break it, the physician is also involved, the patient is also involved, and the system that you're operating in, the hospital system, they're also involved. So I think all of us are important. If we educate our patient, the patient will accept. But then we must educate the doctor also. We must have confidence and we must believe, we must have passion in believing what we are talking about. I think if all these are put together, only then in clinical inertia will be broken. Otherwise, no, the patient will say, no, last 3 months, my daughter's wedding. Oh, daughter's wedding. Okay. Then after 1 year, he'll come. Notice my son's wedding. Oh, son's wedding. Okay. Then that's fine. We'll go on like that. And eventually they end up with complications. So I think we should take a little bit more aggressive approach, hit hard and hit early. Then you will find the first 10 years, you get the sugars under good control. Then you will not develop any complications of diabetes. And we must believe very strongly in that.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. In continuation of our symposium, many patients are reluctant to start with basal and bolus insulin regime. Moreover, multiple insulin injection increase the patient's treatment burden, and this may further limit the adherence to the therapy. So, if a patient is initiated on a once-a-day co-formulation, what factors should be kept in mind regarding the initiation, intensification, and monitoring? And second question to that is that factors to be considered in patients with renal impairment.
So I think the co-formulations which have come, I'm not saying this because this is an Novo Nordisk sponsored symposium, but because ever since this co-formulations came, I have been a great believer and a great user of these co-formulations. The simple reason that if you take the other long-acting insulin, Glargine, for example, you cannot combine a short-acting insulin with that and you have to give it separately. But with this Tresiba kind of insulin, degludec kind of insulin, already there is an aspart joined to that. So it takes care of the postprandial one as well as the fasting. And therefore, you have these two insulins which are in co-formulation. So I think it makes an excellent choice for especially people with, I'm not talking about type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is still basal bolus insulin only. Although very rarely these co-formulations can work, but let's not talk about that. But in type 2 diabetic patients, they already have some beta cell function. They may be already taking some tablets, and therefore all they need is an insulin where two components are joined together. And so in such situations, the co-formulations have really come to stay. They've really become very, very popular. Now the cost has also come down by about 30%, and therefore become more affordable. And they are one of the best insulin. I call them as the Mercedes-Benz of insulin, because the best insulin with two combined with one shot, painless and absolutely smooth with no hypoglycemia. You asked about renal impairment. Well, surprisingly, one would think when you have a long-acting insulin like degludec, you will be scared to use it in renal insufficiency. The beauty of this insulin is that even in people with renal insufficiency, it can be used. So just because the EGFR is slightly low, or if the the creatinine is going up a little bit, it doesn't mean you cannot use the co-formulation or the long-acting insulin because of the very much reduced risk of hypoglycemia, because there is no stacking at all. They work in this unique combination of slow release. And therefore, even in patients with renal insufficiency, you can use it. Of course, if there's an advanced renal failure of the eGFR is 15, then you're going to use small dose of multiple dose of insulin. That's a different thing. But in people with mild to moderate renal insufficiency, I feel no reason why you should not continue to use these co-formulations.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. Now, the general belief is that the basal bolus insulin regime is representative of the gold standard of treatment with people with diabetes. So, do we have any evidence to show that co-formulation can offer similar glycemic control to basal bolus therapy? That is one. And could it offer any other additional benefits to the glycemic control in patients with diabetes? So, do we have the evidence of using this?
Oh, yes. There are so many studies which have been done comparing multiple daily doses of insulin with, say, one or two co-formulations of insulin. And these have been very well, brought out in our guidelines for using insulin. We have published this in JAPI and we published it in many, many places. I have also been a co-author in this. So to cut a long story short, again, going back to the little bit of overlap with the previous question, that in type 1 diabetes, the situation is different. They have zero C-peptide, they have zero insulin secretion. So what they need is small doses of insulin. So basal bolus regime is the best, if not the best, or MDI, multiple daily dose of insulin, or you use a pump. That is the best for a type 1 patient. Very, very few type 2 patients will fit into that category. Maybe there's 1%, 2% of patients with type 2 after 40 years, 30 years duration may start behaving like type 1 by the time the C-peptide is zero. In such patients, stick to the basal bolus. But the majority of patients, 90%, 95% of type 2 patients who need insulin, just need a little bit of insulin. And therefore, some of them respond to even one basal insulin. But as I said, with our high carbohydrate diet, the majority of them respond to one of the co-formulation insulin. Sometimes, if the fasting is still high and the rest of the day is under control, then using two co-formulations, for example, this Ryzodec given twice a day, a combination degludec and aspart given twice a day, works extremely well. And that is something which I have used a lot. We have a lot of evidence in this. There are a lot of publications which have come in this. Now, the advantage you asked me is very obvious. Number one, you're restricting the number of type 2 patients. We're telling them, we used to call them as non-insulin dependent diabetes earlier, or NIDD. And then asking them to take 4 times insulin a day is not correct. First of all, they have insulin resistance. So why are we giving them 4 times insulin a day? So all they need is a little topping up of insulin. So if you split the insulin into 2 or even 1 shot of this co-formulation insulin, it works extremely well, and you can bring down the A1C level. So if they have some amount of C-peptide, these are the people who can be treated with 1 or with 2 co-formulations. That the advantage is very obvious. Number one, hypoglycemia is much less. The number of injections come down. The the smoothness with which this insulin works. All these are big winners as far as type 2 diabetes is concerned. And therefore, we tell patients that now I've gotten insulin, just 1 shot you take and you'll be fine. They are willing, and therefore the compliance and the clinical inertia is also cut down.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Mohan. Excellent and excellent review of the insulin choice and the reflection of the right choice of the insulin combination for the management. Now, in continuation with that, we have another question. That patient, as you rightly said, the right insulin regime and right formulation. Do you feel that type of insulin delivery device matters much in the management of diabetes? Because type of insulin, co-formulations, all those things are very important, including basal bolus. But the type of insulin delivery device, and what are the factors to be considered while prescribing an insulin delivery device? Because we have right from syringes and needles to the pen devices and disposable pen devices, and so many things are available for insulin delivery. So would you make some focus on the various devices and usefulness of the newer devices for the management and delivery of the insulin in diabetic patients?
Yeah, 100%, Dr. Shah. See, if you see, because we have all been in this line for a very long time, and as you know, this is the 100th year of insulin, and I've been in this for exactly 50 years, actually. 1971, I joined medical college and I started doing work on diabetes. So my 50th year as well. So we have been in the days when we have to have the glass syringes and boil them and then use the animal insulin, and you'll get allergic reaction and you'll get lipoatrophy and you have to infections due to boiling it and reboiling it and big needles. And from that time, we came to the disposable syringes, and that was a big thing. Oh, now we can dispose it off. And then came the pen. When the pen came, you just carry it around with you, because even with the glass, even with the disposable syringe, it's still like, are you a drug addict carrying around all these needles and all? Once it came to the pen, it became very good. But some of these pens are horrible, they get stuck, and then you keep that, and then you throw it away. It's a costly insulin, you throw it away. This particular device, which we have with the co-formulation, is considered one of the best devices in the market. I don't know if you've used it, but it's so smooth, so absolutely smooth. Then the other thing is the reading. When you see the reading, you can't see, is it 22 or 24 or here it is so nice. The reading is good. You have a click sound and so easy to. So the device makes a lot of difference. It's like driving a car. You drive the Ambassador car and you drive a Toyota. There's a lot of difference, between how you use the. So a device also makes a big difference, and therefore I think this particular one can be given a gold medal as far as the device is also concerned, and therefore patients have never had a problem with using this device. Therefore, the device is a huge. Of course, there are also pumps and so on, but I'm not talking about pump because that is not for the co-formulation. That's only for using regular insulin. Pumps is a completely different ball game. I'm not discussing that. But I think these kind of devices which are patient friendly are very, very important. Now, the modern day next one which is going to come is the smart devices. It'll even tell you the last dose you took. It'll remind you when you took that. All that is also going to get automatically linked to your cell phone. So that is also coming. So that makes life much, much easier.
Sir, thank you so much. It was so pleasure to hear from you. There are many questions coming, but those questions will be answered to the delegates personally. And thank you for this amazing insight, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan, for a very wonderful display of the various factors in the management of diabetes with insulin. Thank you. Thank you once again. And thank you once again, the organizing.
Mayur Patel and Yash Patel and the whole family, as well as Swastikon, the organizers, as well as Noah Nordisk and Dr. Navneet Shah for this for the wonderful session. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. Dr. Mayur Patel here. As always, you are great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sparing the time.
Congratulations on the great show. Thank you.
Thank you.